Hello, everyone. So my name is Serhat Can, and today we're going to be talking about DevOps. And I'm pretty sure you have heard about DevOps before, but not everyone knows how it relates to Formula One or ants. So in this talk, we are going to learn how DevOps changed the way we operate software, and it's going to be, hopefully, it's going to be fun. Um, so First of all, there is no right or wrong uh, in this talk. I mean, as you know, software is complex, but when we are talking about humans, things get a lot more chaotic, and that's fine. After all, we cannot agree. We cannot even agree on how to spell DevOps, right? There are different variations, and there is no right or wrong way, and it's on purpose. So before we start, I'd like to talk a little bit about myself. My name is again Serhat Can, and I'm an technical evangelist at Atlassian. I've been working with the Opsgenie team for 5 years. Before that, before the evangelism role, I was an engineer. And now I'm also an AWS community hero, so I do a lot of speaking and a lot of content for AWS ecosystem as well. I'm also a conference organizer at DevOps Days global team, DevOps Days Istanbul, AWS Community Day Turkey, and Serverless Day Istanbul. I'm also helping. Run communities in Turkey, Cloud and Serverless Turkey, and DevOps Turkey. So if you happen to come to Turkey after the pandemic, I'll be happy to arrange you a talk and hang out. So just please reach out to me, and I'm happy to chat. So as always, let's talk a little bit about why, because it's I mean, before we going to the how part, because we need to understand why we needed DevOps to be able to appreciate how it changed the software industry. So traditionally, developers were writing code and ops people were responsible for running it on production. But when this happens, there is a lot of friction, slowness, and disconflict. So when developers don't have responsibilities on software delivery up to production, they don't get feedback on their code and they don't have empathy for the ops team. So, but if they get feedback, usually before DevOps, it was usually too late or not considered as their responsibility. So they didn't really feel the need to act on that feedback. So when problems occur, it was easy to blame the other team, like who is already responsible for running the code on production. You know that team, ops team, right? And when look at the ops team, it's a similar story. So they blame developers to write shitty code, right, and deal with alerts. They deal with alerts all day long. So there is no time for automation and all that cool stuff. Um, so the main problem in the story is wrong incentives and missing communication. So DevOps aims to solve this problem by breaking the barriers between these teams and allowing them to learn from each other. So there are different definitions of DevOps, but the founders didn't make an official definition statement because every company and person is different. But they talk a lot about some common features. So let's take a look at two of my favorite DevOps definitions. So first is from Ken McGrage. So he says DevOps is a culture where people, regardless of title or background, work together to imagine, deploy, and operate a system. So this definition focuses on collaboration between teams throughout the software development cycle. And so I really like it. And the other one is a bit more detailed. It's from AWS official page on DevOps. They describe DevOps as the combination of cultural philosophies, practices, and tools. It's important because you might have heard some talks mention all about DevOps is all about cultural, all about tools. It's a combination of these, and the, and the definition also focuses on the importance of pace. And software is obviously is expensive to run and update, so DevOps makes it cheaper, and it's important for organizations to be fast to stay relevant. So it's a matter of life and death for many organizations. So they need to be fast. And so I will not make my own definition, but in this talk, instead, I want to move on to the how part and explain my points on how DevOps changed the way we operate software. So regardless of the definition or realities of the companies, DevOps changed certain aspects of software development and operations in the last decade. So now, after some boring definitions, let's talk a little bit about ants. So not sure how many of you watched Black Wars, but I watched a lot of them. I really like them, but ants usually wins. Um, their strength lies in numbers, but only if they work together. So individually, they're not particularly the strongest, but they are great at working together and coordinating their activities. So software teams are not that different. Software teams are also strong when they work together. And individual efforts matters, but up to some point. So it doesn't matter a lot in the long run for big and complex software projects. So that is why it's crucial to create a shared responsibility and the right incentives for devs and ops to work together. So we need to create a culture of shared responsibility among dev and ops teams. And there are ways to create this culture of shared responsibility. So first, teams should unite around one customer-oriented goal. Their customers come first. It doesn't matter if it's an internal or external customer, but the main goal is that you have a customer and your goal is to satisfy that customer's needs. And uh, that's, I mean, at the end, writing the code is not the point. The point is someone is getting the benefits of using that code, that service. So the second is the leadership support. It's important to create a culture of shared responsibility, because without leaders empowering teams, their impact, the teams or individuals' impact stays limited. To be able to achieve collaboration between teams, leaders must repeat the same principles and commit the necessary investment in tools and practices. So it's really important, because at the end of the day, DevOps requires a lot of investment in time and money. And without the leadership support, you cannot create that culture of shared responsibility. So, and the third one is transparency. For a clear and effective communication, teams should know their goals, roadmap, and learn about updates. Like, I mean, even if they're high level, they're useful for teams to unite. Because if you don't know what another team is doing, it's really easy to blame, easy to say that they are not working effectively or they are not collaborating well. But if you know their struggles, what they're working on, it's easier to empathize. And the last but not the least important, of course, is the ownership part. And our goal at the end of the day is to increase people's ownership, teams' ownership, so they make the best decisions over the long run and take responsibility. And I cannot go on to the next part before I mention how effective delivery pipelines are to achieve this culture of shared responsibility. When software testing and shipping cycle is automated, when the responsibility in shipping code to testing environments or production is automated, you start seeing people complain a lot less. Teams start operating with less dependencies and more visibility. So do you remember we mentioned the speed of software delivery? So let's talk a little bit about Formula One and the masters of speed. So the second part, you're a team that builds race cars, and mechanics build race cars and drivers operate them, right? But consider this: what happens when mechanics don't drive and just build, and drivers don't understand about the mechanics and just they're responsible for driving? I mean, if you try that, let me assure you, things won't go well. And this responsibility has to be shared, has to go both ways. Mechanics should be able to drive the cars, should be able to test them well. But even more importantly, drivers should be able to understand about cars and its parts. So F1 drivers know their engines so intimately that they can usually report issues before the engineers sees them on their telemetries. And so one famous example is Michael Schumacher could tell his engineers when one of the valves was not sealing properly, um, and that happens when driving at over like 300 kilometers, more than 330 kilometers per hour, and for racing for position. And on multiple occasions, have drivers communicated to the pit on an impending engine blow up even before the engineers could confirm it. So they really feel they're really masters of their mechanics. And racing for a professional outfit requires intimate understanding of each component of the car, not just engines. Drivers usually provide feedback on the aero changes that they want. For example, they could say like before the pit stop, they change the angle of the nose wing by, let's say, three plus rotations. What the wheels are doing, they are masters of what the wheels are doing, brake tires, brake bites, and so much more. So giving the right feedback after sessions is important than going out and doing all out racing. So how is this related to DevOps? Actually, it's very much related. So just as we cannot expect, sorry, just as we cannot expect F1 drivers, Formula One drivers to just drive, we cannot expect developers to just write code anymore. That we have proven that that doesn't work. So developers should take part in software delivery and operations. They need to get alerts, and when things go sideways, they need to take responsibility. There are three major benefits for developers taking ownership and responsibilities on production issues. First, there are ever increasing demands around availability, reliability, and security of our applications nowadays. And without developers, we cannot achieve them. And the second one is, and this is the major benefit for our case, how DevOps, how part, it helps dev teams and it helps developers teams, the developers to gain empathy for the operations teams, because now they see the problems from the first hand, they receive alerts, they see the compromises they made on the development, the effect of those compromises on the production. So now they can empathize. And the other one is developers and management collaboration empathy, because when uh, if operations engineers are responsible for production, the management would just ask developers to just create features. When they want to prioritize operational issues, they will be hesitant because they don't really see, like, I mean, all they see is developers performing really at high pace when things are really going worse in the operations side. But when developers spend their time on operations, and then if that's their daily in their daily routine, now management can also see the operations bad decisions they made, uh, the effect of bad decisions they made on developers. So now it's easier to prioritize the operational issues when devs are also in charge. So referring back to Formula One, we don't have to build many things ourselves anymore. So many Formula One teams also don't build their own engines. They use it from other companies, and they are pretty successful in the competition too. So cloud and DevOps, enabled companies to achieve the same thing. DevOps changed the way we approach software ownership, and operations is a obviously long game and it's expensive. So the change that DevOps brings, usually using using actual code and APIs to manage infrastructure, changed how we approach traditional operations. So we now don't have to build many things from scratch. And that's really powerful because, of course, it doesn't mean using just Docker, Kubernetes, or Jenkins. That doesn't turn ops into an engineering role, but this means following best practices like infrastructure as code in operations. And we should be codifying our infrastructure and tools to provision process and turn traditional operations into an engineering role. And they will start codifying things, automating things. And the fun part begins when automation becomes our actual job, though. So that's why it's important to avoid automate everything mantra, because that doesn't work. But it is important to automate what matters for the business. So one example here is pets and kettles. There's an analogy I want to talk a little bit about. Like, it's mostly used for cloud, but it's applicable for DevOps too. So when we create reusable infrastructure, instead of naming our service to superhero names or something else, probably you have seen that before, we start using automation practices like infrastructure as code. So with modern practices to automation, DevOps reduce complexity and apply learning from we can apply these codifying things, learnings from development to operations now. So another major way DevOps changed our approach to software is how we design and architect software to foster collaboration and ownership. And I really like this quote: a good intention with a bad approach often leads to a poor result. So even though our intention is good, if we are not designing and architecting well, that will reduce our ability to innovate and our success in DevOps, let's say. So at the end of the day, we hear DevOps along with microservices a lot. So microservices became popular in the last decades, um, mostly because of the scale that these IT giants became. Without DevOps practices, microservices would just create chaos. So lots of investments into ops and automation is required for a healthy microservices environment. And microservices is needed not because we need to scale our apps, but because we need to scale our organizations. And remember, DevOps is the same. We have a lot of people and teams, and we need to reduce their dependencies, use automation practices, and foster the collaboration between team with shared responsibilities. So when teams design and architect to foster collaboration and ownership, they apply DevOps practices like continuous integration and delivery in their pipelines. They start treating infrastructure as code that helps them they start treating infrastructure as code, and that helps them have fewer bugs and outages. And essentially, this makes companies lose less money and move faster with changes. And the number from Atlassian research, 57% of teams report fewer bugs and outages by adopting after they adopt CI/CD solutions, and this sends a powerful powerful message. And the last item in my list is in how DevOps changed our industry is measurement for key success metrics. And we know that it's important to measure, but it's been hard without much visibility. So there is a fast emerging concept, a popular concept called service level objectives. That's from site reliability engineering. Probably, if you heard about DevOps, you heard about SRE. From Google originated, let's say, DevOps implementation. They are detailed. They are covered in detail in Google's SRE books, so you can read them. I'm just going to mention what they are here, just to give an idea on how DevOps teams may be a wrong word, but nowadays a lot of people use them. So how DevOps, let's say, uses service level objectives to measure the right things. You can call them whatever you want. You don't have to call them service level objectives. Make them work for your team. That's important. But fundamentally, the goal is to tie business goals to operational goals. For example, service X, let's say, should return 99.9% of HTTP requests under 10 milliseconds. That's a success goal. Let's say that's a goal objective for a service, and that has an impact on customers' happiness, and that's an important criteria for customers. But obviously, you have to talk with the customer and go over the objectives, because you don't want to just make up some unimportant, let's say, unimportant objectives For example, let's say 90% test coverage, that doesn't mean anything for the customers because that's an internal thing, right? So remember, the important part is customers come first, not the software itself. So we need to talk with customers' needs and define service level objectives and measure them to see how well we are doing. And another approach to DevOps measurement is to keep track of some important metrics like lead time for changes, deployment frequency, time to restore service, or change failure rate. We see these four metrics in many places nowadays. These metrics are good indicators of how well teams are empowered to operate on their own, how stable these automated pipelines are, how prepared teams are to solve incidents as they happen. And obviously, no matter what, you will have incidents. So we talked about a lot of things. We talked about ants, Formula One examples, some different ways to empower DevOps teams. So just to wrap up, DevOps changed the way we operate software. With DevOps, we need to create a culture, a shared responsibility culture among DevOps teams. That's how DevOps, the biggest way, the most important way that DevOps changed our approach. We need to create a shared responsibilities, right incentives. And one of the important ways is to give developers some responsibilities on production, on the way to production and production. So they need to start taking ownership. They need to be on call. They need to get alerts. And then ops people also have responsibilities. And nowadays we see ops people renamed as DevOps or SRE, but we need to, what we need to do, it doesn't matter what they are called usually. If the engineers are aware of their responsibilities, it doesn't matter much. But at the end of the day, with DevOps, the goal is to you want them to automate things and approach problems as an engineering challenges and solve those problems. So, and even if we talk about giving more ownership, more responsibilities to developers, and expect ops to approach operations as an engineering role, we need to build the right architecture to foster collaboration and ownership. Because if we don't empower individual teams, at the end of the day, it's chaos. So without the right architecture, it's really hard to do the other things. So it's an enabler. And of course, that's a well-known fact. If we don't measure, we cannot improve. So we need to start measuring what matters for the business, for the customers, and take actions based on what our customers' actual needs. So thank you very much for joining my talk. You can reach out to me at srhtcn, Serhat Can without the vowels, on Twitter, or you can add me on LinkedIn. I'll be happy to connect. Thank you very much. Have a great day.